I gave half of my adult life to evangelical Christianity, and I absolutely loved it. And, I loved a lot of the people in it, and still do. So hear me before we start. This isn't an attack, it's just a thread that I could not stop pulling. October 19th, 2009, 3 in the morning, couldn't sleep, just lying there wondering where my life was headed. And I had something that I could only call a supernatural, mystical experience, an experience of God. I felt no fear in it, no conditions, just pure presence, the freest I have ever felt. And I took that most free thing I had ever experienced, and I walked straight into a evangelical megachurch where the fear of hell that I had been carrying since I was a kid took that moment and asked me just one question. But yeah, are you good enough to keep it? That's the question of this whole machine. I spent years chasing that answer. I flew to Israel and got baptized in the Jordan River where Jesus was baptized. Then, a couple years later, I flew back and did it again. Same river, twice, just to be safe in case the first one didn't take. And that's not devotion. That's a guy who just never once felt like he was enough. And here's what finally had me turn around and take a look at everything. It wasn't one thing, actually. It was, watching people who taught me to follow the man who knelt down and washed feet, line up behind a man who does the exact opposite. A man who rules by fear, wins by dominance, bullies, needs every eye in the room, and can't stand to be upstage. Now, I'm not going to spend this whole thing saying his name. I don't need to. You already know who I mean. And honestly, this was never really about him. He's just the clearest reflection of something that was already there underneath. He's not the disease, he's the x-ray. I've got 2 daughters, and I kept thinking this whole next generation is watching this, watching us hand this man the crown and calling it holy. And I couldn't stop asking, what does this teach the younger generations what a strong man is? So I couldn't stay quiet. There are 2 ways to build a life, out of fear or out of love. And honestly, I've lived both. Fear built the thing that I'm about to walk you through, and love is the thing that I'm here trying to protect. So this series is about what's underneath, the dark side. And I don't mean that to be scary. I mean that as, the part where we were all trained to just not look at. So today is the logic. And if you're still all the way inside evangelical Christianity, I'm not here to try to take your God. If what you have is real, it can survive a few honest questions. The truth has never once needed you to stop looking at it. And I know, the reflex that's coming because I've gotten it 100 times. I'll lay something out, calm, just the facts, and I get the 3 letters back, TDS. Conversation over, same move I grew up with in church. The doubt is the devil talking. It's the kill switch. You don't actually have to deal with the question if you make the person asking the question the problem. So before you reach for that kill switch on me, just let's look at the thing first. That's all I'm asking. Mostly I'm just going to ask questions, the same ones I had to ask myself, and I just want you to keep one thing in the corner of your eye the whole time. The part of you that can ask the question is actually not the belief that you're questioning. That there's something underneath, just watching, quiet. And it's already free, and it's, it was there before the fear even showed up. And we'll come back to it. And I think something real is trying to be born out of all of this. Pull this thread with me. Original sin. Now, here's the first question. Why does the story we call Good News open by telling a child they showed up broken? Let me tell you about a father. He put his little girl in a room. One thing in there she is not allowed to touch. And he already knows. He built the room. He put the thing in it. He left the door wide open that she's actually going to touch the thing. She's little. She doesn't even know yet what not allowed means. And she touches it. And he doesn't just correct her. He punishes her. And then her kids, and then her kids, and everyone who comes from her forever. Before I tell you who that father is, just notice how you feel about him. That's the garden, the tree, the serpent he let in, 2 people who hadn't yet eat the thing that lets you know to tell right from wrong, being asked to make the biggest right or wrong choice there ever was, is, and ever will be. Now, someone will say Genesis never says God knew they'd do it, but every church I sat in taught They taught me God knows everything from start to finish. So which is it? He knew when he built the room and did it anyway, or he didn't know and he's not what they said he was. You don't get to have both. So let me just ask this in a human way. If a father did that, set the kid up, then cursed every grandchild for it forever, what would you call him? Now sit with the fact that we're taught to call it love, the opening line of a love story. And it made me ask a bigger question. What even is sin? I was handed one answer, it's filth, something that disgusts God. I don't buy that anymore. I think sin is actually just disconnection. And once you see it that way, you see it everywhere. You hurt somebody, you feel that wall go up, that's it. You reach for the drink, the phone, whatever, not because you want it, but because you need to not feel something. That's you, cut off from you. There's a line in Colossians where Paul says we're enemies in our own mind, not in reality. It's just in our minds. The distance was never on God's end. And here's a thread pulled all the way through. They sold you a wound you weren't actually born with so they could sell you the bandage. I pray you have the courage to pull that thread. Now, pull this thread with me. God is love, and God also made hell. Here's a strange one. Can love build a torture chamber? Same book. One page says God is love, not loving, made of it. It's his essence. And another page says he built a room where the screaming from the torment never stops. Picture the room. One purpose, pain, no passing out, no dying, no end, just the next second and the next forever. Now let's picture the architect. He drew the blueprints before he made a single soul. He knew every name that would end up inside. He counted them and built it anyway and made people anyway and called it good. Would you leave your kid overnight in that house? Then why do we call him Father? And who was the room for originally? The story says it was built for the devil. And what was his crime? What earns you fire forever? He wanted to be like God. He reached a little too high, pulled too much attention. So let me get this straight. Being of infinite love, infinite power, no rival, anywhere in existence, felt threatened by something he made, and was so bothered that one of his creatures might shine a little too bright, he built an eternal torture chamber to make an example of him. That's not a secure God. That's an insecure king who can't stand to be upstaged. Now hold on to that face. We're going to meet it again before this is over. Oh, and be like God, that's the assignment of every Sunday. Be holy as he is holy. Imitate the Father. Just not too much, I guess. Don't reach too high. Just stay small, or, there's a place you might go. The quietest question in the whole thing is, can you love something you're terrified of? You can kneel to it. You can perform for it. You'll flinch when it walks in, but love? I think I've actually been to hell. Not after I died, while I was very much alive. I got sick for over a year, and something in me dropped into a dark, deep darkness with no floor, honestly, and I felt cut off from everyone, from God, from myself, and that was hell. Not fire, separation. And honestly, it didn't come from sin. I was at the highest point of my evangelical career at that time. It actually came from years of performing, being the good version, the acceptable version, until I'd lost the thread of who I actually was. The line they always say, God doesn't send anyone to hell. I used to think that was actually a cop-out. Now I think they're accidentally right, just not how they mean it. Now, nobody gets sentenced to the dark. You drift into it. One wall, one performance, one buried piece at a time, until you're standing in the fire wondering how you even got there. That's the choosing. And the good news hiding in it, if you can walk in, you can walk out. I pray you have the courage to pull that thread. Now, pull this thread with me. The cosmic war that isn't. So we've got our villain, the devil, God's great enemy, locked in an epic battle for your soul. And your doubts might be just the devil sneaking in to drag you down to hell with him. That's terrifying. It's big. It's cinematic. But let's just read it, though. Job, he loses everything. Fire falls from heaven and kills, all of his kids. Whose idea was that? Look it up. God's. He brings it up first like a proud parent showing off. The devil in the New Testament wants to test Peter and has to ask Jesus for permission. Raises his hand, waits for the signature. Spirit leads Jesus into the desert to be tempted, walks him straight to the villain, and drops him off. Every single time the devil needs a hall pass. Can't touch a hair, can't tempt a soul, can't strike a match without it getting signed off from the big guy upstairs. So here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. That's not a war. That's, a war has two sides. This is one guy in total control and his employee. The devil isn't God's rival. He's God's contractor. He does the jobs the boss doesn't want his own fingerprints on, which lands us somewhere strange. If there's no war outside of you, then all the dread you were taught to feel about your own questions, the voice that said doubt is the enemy, doubt is the devil getting in, who benefits from you being that scared of your own mind? I pray you have the courage to pull that thread. Now pull this thread with me. Jesus never said it. Quick game. The most important warning in the universe, eternal fire, most of humanity, no take backs. Who should be the loudest, most clearest, most repetitive voice about that? I would say the most loving teacher who ever lived, obviously. Now I got a pool in my backyard. My girls are little. You'd better believe I am clear about this pool. Every day, no riddles, because the cost of being vague about something that could take my daughters is way too high. That's what love does when the stakes are real. It gets very clear, crystal clear. So when I went looking for where Jesus gets clear about hell, where he says it plainly, believe this or burn, it's not there. He talks about the poor, the outsider, the enemy you're supposed to love. He said he came to find the lost, not sort them out into fireproof bins. And the only people he ever really scorches, not the sinners, not the doubters, the religious crowd, the ones that were dead certain they had God all figured out. So the clearest teacher in history went quiet on the one thing that supposedly matters most. No. So somebody else filled in the silence. Somebody added the fire and then told you your soul depended on the part that they added. Now here's that thread pulled all the way through. The scariest doctrine in the faith is one the founder never even taught. I pray you have the courage to pull that thread. Now pull this thread with me. A man after God's own heart. Let me tell you about a king. And I won't name him yet. Just watch the king. He takes a census out of pride. You know the punishment? 70,000 of his own people who had nothing to do with it dropped dead in a plague. He wants a woman. She's married. He takes her, gets her pregnant, sends her husband to the front line to die. The punishment? The baby. The baby dies. And there's a second punishment for that one that never really heard in church. God orchestrates for this king's son to take the king's concubines up to the roof and assault them in front of everybody. And those, from that point, those women are treated as unclean for the rest of their lives. That's the sentence. It lands on them. They did nothing. So what kind of heart does that king have? Now here's a twist. His own scripture calls him a man after God's own heart. That's David. And there's a prophet in his story, Nathan, who once told David a little tale just to get him to see himself. You are the man. And I'm doing to the story what Nathan did to the king. I'm not asking you to condemn David. I'm asking if David is the man after God's own heart, what's that quietly telling you about the heart it's after? Now here's that thread pulled all the way through. The women keep paying for the men's sins. Hold that. It comes back. I pray you have the courage to pull that thread. Now pull this thread with me. The weaker vessel. Quick one. Who failed first? There's a verse that calls wives the weaker vessel, and the system uses it to keep women from leading. So let's look at the very first act of male leadership in the whole book. Adam. One instruction. Don't eat from that tree. And he's standing right there when Eve eats. He watches. He eats too. And when God asks him, hey, what happened here? He blames Eve. First recorded act of male leadership is an absolute total failure, followed immediately by blaming the woman. And weaker how exactly? I mean, women survive childbirth. I get a cold and I'm in bed asking God to take me home. That was never about strength, it's about authority. So let me just ask this plainly. The men who built the doctrine that women can't lead, who are they covering for? Here's the thread pulled all the way through. They call the other half weak to keep from looking at the first man who couldn't lead himself. I pray you have the courage to pull that thread. Now pull this thread with me, the cross. What kind of father needs someone tortured before he can bring himself to love his own kids? I'm gonna let that sit, because the cross, we're told, is the most beautiful act in history. God sends his son, who is also himself, to be tortured to death to pay our debt. I held that at my center of everything for years. But let's just look at it plainly. Jesus was dead for what, about 2 days? And what we're told we're safe from is forever, eternity. Now, if I owe $1 billion and somebody pays 5, is that debt really settled? And underneath that is even a stranger picture. A father so angry with his own kids, he can't love them until someone innocent bleeds. And then everyone gets covered in the blood, and then he can stand to look at us. But honestly, I think the cross points at something far deeper and more real. New life coming from death. But the version I was handed, the transaction, we grabbed the menu and started worshiping it instead of tasting the meal. Now here's that thread pulled all the way through. They took the most human thing, death, then new life, and turned it into a bill. I pray you have the courage to pull that thread. Now pull this thread with me, the loophole. At what age can a child choose to be saved? The faith runs on a personal decision, but a 2-year-old can't make that decision. So the church, it invented an answer: the age of accountability, the age below which a kid can't be sent to hell. Only problem is it's not in the Bible. No verses. It got added because a God who damns children is just honestly too horrifying to sit with. And I don't say that as like a gotcha. It might be the most honest thing the system ever did. So here's the real question. When you have to invent a loophole just to keep loving your own God, isn't the loophole the most godlike thing in the whole room? The instinct that whispered, this can't be right. That's the watching thing I told you about. Let's start trusting that, because it's more reliable than the actual rules. I pray you have the courage to pull that thread. Now pull this thread with me. Us versus them. What happens to a person the moment they believe the whole human race is split into 2 teams forever? Saved and unsaved, in and out. Once that's your map, protecting your group and fearing the outsider, it isn't a bug of the system. It's the next logical step. And you can draw a straight line from there to a lot of what we're seeing in the world right now. But let's look at the founder of this faith. He kept crossing the exact line on purpose. He made the outsider the hero. The father runs to the son before the son cleans himself up. He ate on purpose with the people everyone had written off. And here's the verse they hung on the gate. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I was taught that that's the bouncer at the door. Right beliefs or you're out. But look at the words. I am. That's the name God gives himself. So what if he's pointing at the I am, the presence underneath your own name, and saying that's the way? Not a checkpoint to clear, a direction to turn inward towards, the thing you forgot you were already connected to. So here's the thread pulled all the way through. They turned I am the way into a wall, but it was always just a door that opens inward. I pray you have the courage to pull that thread. Now, pull this thread, the Trinity. If Jesus is God, and God never changes, where was Jesus when the Old Testament happened? Because that God commands genocide, permits slavery, gives instructions on how to beat your slave, and then, the standard answer, obviously, is that's the Old Testament. Jesus changed everything. Except the doctrine of the Trinity says Jesus is that same God, same essence, right there when all that happened. Same yesterday, today, and forever. So you can't wall the two apart. The very doctrine built to defend Jesus is the one that ties him to the worst of it. And here's what I think this actually means. Something in this faith has to grow. There's no way the man who washed feet and said the last would be first could stand present to those atrocities. Something has to give, and I don't think it's Jesus. I pray you have the courage to pull that thread. Now pull this thread with me, the fruit. This one's tender, so I'm gonna go slow. The crowd that is loudest about the sanctity of life grounds that in the Bible. And here's the honest question I never let myself ask. What do you do with the fact that the same Bible has a God that ends pregnancies inside and outside the womb? There's a ritual in the Old Testament that is meant to terminate a pregnancy if a husband gets jealous. God kills the firstborn in Egypt. The babies, that are just absolutely slaughtered in the genocides God commanded. David's baby we just talked about. I'm not saying it to score a point. I read this book for years and actually just never saw it. But now I can't unsee it, and honestly, it's really hard to hold. So where I've landed gently is I hate abortion happens. It's one of the most painful things a person can face, usually on the scariest day of their life. But I also believe God is love, and love is all-knowing. If love already knows pregnancy won't make it to term, I don't think love puts a soul in that body, a body it knows it won't make it. That's where I've landed, honestly, and I hold it with a very open hand. Now, the founder, Jesus, says you know a tree by its fruit. So what's the fruit? The most Christian region in the country, the Bible Belt, leads the nation in divorce, teen pregnancy, poverty, incarceration. The most religious state is also the poorest, with an infant mortality rate closer to a developing nation than the rest of our country. So I'll just ask, a system that produces that and then calls itself the moral conscience of the nation, is it asking us to look, or asking us just to not look too closely? Now here's a thread pulled all the way through. A faith built on fear doesn't make people who love freely. It makes people who comply. One last question, and this is the one the whole thing's been walking toward. What do you call a king so threatened by something he made that he exiles it and then builds it a place of ending torment and fills that place with most of the people he'd ever create just for believing the wrong things about him? I don't call that a secure God. I call that an insecure king protecting his throne. And here's the part I need you to notice. I've described that king a few times tonight. The one who can't be upstaged, who needs every eye in the room, who rules by fear and calls it strength. And I still haven't said his name. I don't have to. You already saw his face. It showed up in your mind on its own, probably at the beginning of this video. And you've been sitting with it since. That's the whole thing. I didn't put him there. The logic did. The fear did. You just recognized him. Because whatever you give your deepest devotion to, you slowly start to become. And people trained by a fearful, dominating God will feel strangely at home with a fearful, dominating man. He won't feel like betrayal of the faith. He'll just feel comfortable. And I don't say that with contempt. I say that with a deep grief, because I almost went that way myself. But here's where I actually am now. I didn't lose God in any of this deconstructing. I lost a picture of God. The cop, the judge, the one watching to catch me. And underneath it was the thing that was already there October 19th, 2009, before the fear got its hands on it. Love, pure presence, no conditions, that quiet awareness underneath your thoughts right now. And the people who actually wrote this stuff said God was never keeping score. Paul said the opposite, actually. He said, in him we live and move and have our being. Jesus said, the kingdom of God is within you. And then there's my favorite verse that says, Christ is all and in all. All of it. Everyone, not only the saved, not only the ones who got it right. All. There's a line from my goat, Richard Rohr, that I can't shake. He said, Jesus didn't come to change God's mind about us. He came to change our minds about God. Now, please just sit with that. The whole time, the distance was on our end. not God's. Maybe salvation was never about escaping a punishment. Maybe it was always just coming home to a connection that was there the whole time. We just lost sight of it. So here's what I actually see coming. People keep saying Western Christianity is dying, and they say it like it's a tragedy. But what if dying is the point? Because the one pattern the whole universe runs on, the one I lived over and over, is that new life comes out of death. Things in me had to die. I went through the dark, and what came back was a version of myself I could have never have ever built on my own. That's resurrection. Not a magic trick 2,000 years ago. It's a pattern. So when I watched, the old Christianity crumble, the one built around Jesus that ended up looking nothing like him, maybe that's not God's house falling. Maybe that's God clearing the lot. Maybe it's Jesus turning over the tables again. Maybe the Holy Spirit is the one actually doing the crumbling. And the thing that is being born underneath finally looks more like him. Now, when you pull the thread that you're most scared to pull, you brace for the whole thing to come down on your head. And the only thing that actually falls is fear. What's underneath was never in danger. It was the realest thing the whole time. Fear builds one kind of world. You can tell which kind by the fruit. And I want my daughters, your kids, and the whole next generation to grow up in the other one, the one love builds. Now, if you made it all the way here, thank you. Honestly, it takes real courage to look at this. And if you're angry and you want to go ahead and tear me apart in the comments, I get it. I really do. But let me just leave you with one last story. 2,000 years ago, there was a man who walked into a religious community who was certain it had God all figured out. This man picked up their own scriptures, their own theology, and turned it gently back on to the ones who were most sure about God. And for that, they wanted to destroy him. And eventually they did. I wonder if you could think of who I'm talking about. Next time, we're going to talk about the psychology, what this faith actually does to a person on the inside. My name's Kyle. This is Meticulous Universe. I pray you have the courage to pull that thread.